Welcome, everyone. I'm just so elated to welcome everyone to the inaugural Journal of the American College of Radiology Virtual Journal Club. We are so excited to bring this to you, to our readership, with fresh, innovative ways to reach you. I'm so excited today to have an esteemed group of panelists joining me to discuss a really incredible article that we all collaborated on in the recent focus issue on private practice for the Journal of the American College of Radiology. This month in the JACR, there's this awesome focus issue specifically geared towards private practice. However, some of the articles can really apply to any practice type. So today we're going to be discussing transitioning to independent practice in early career perspective. I personally feel this is the time to discuss this article, as so many trainees are now navigating the waters about, picking the field of their choice in terms of, do they want to go into academics, private practice, teleradiology? There's so many avenues that a young radiologist can take. So what we're going to do first is introduce our amazing panelists, and then we'll dive into the discussion. I encourage you today that if you have questions, please at any time type them into the live chat. We will be addressing them, particularly as we're talking about certain topics. We want to make sure that we answer all questions. We can also leave time at the end for a Q&A as well. So if we could bring on our panelists and introduce them. Wonderful. So let's start off by having Darel Heitkamp introduce himself to us. Darel, Dr. Heitkamp, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you practice?
Hi, my name is Darel Heitkamp. I spent the first 14 years of my career in academic radiology at Indiana University. I was program director for the diagnostic radiology residency for 11 years. And then I made sort of a mid-career transition to private practice. And currently I am at Advent Health Radiology in Orlando, Florida, which is a non-university affiliated group of radiologists with a residency program, and I'm a cardiothoracic radiologist in that group.
Wonderful. Welcome, and thanks for being on today for our virtual journal club. Next, we have Dr. Margaret or Meg Fleming.
Hi, glad to be here. So I too made a career transition. So I started out straight from fellowship. I stayed on at my academic institution at Emory, and I worked there for 3 years. At that time, I made the decision to transfer to private practice. So I stayed in Atlanta, and I'm with Quantum Radiology, which is one of the largest radiology groups in the country. We're a large independent group that services a large hospital system in the area.
Wonderful. Thanks for being on today, Dr. Fleming. All right, Dr. J. Parikh.
So thank you for having me. My name is Jay Parikh. I'm a radiologist here in Houston, Texas. I started off my career in private practice, first 3 years in the really hardcore, I would say, entrepreneurial private practice in Chicago, and then followed that with almost 15 years, over 14 years, at a really good private practice in Swedish, where we were a hospital-based model and employees of the hospital with a productivity type incentive kind of clause to join them and work there. And after that, I kind of transitioned the opposite direction from what everybody else has done. I actually went from private practice to academics in my mid-career. No regrets about any of the places I worked. Just for me, I was at that stage in my life where I was ready for a change, and I was always a closet academic, I guess. I was able to come out by coming to MD Anderson.
Wonderful. It's so interesting to see how everyone ended up where they are currently. And including me. So I actually started out my practice in pure academics. I used to practice on the East Coast at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And then I transitioned to a different job in 2018 to the Kansas City, Missouri area, where I am in more of a hybrid practice where I am a partner with a private practice group called Alliance Radiology. We are physically located at Liberty Hospital, where we've partnered with this hospital for over 30 years. And then I'm an associate professor of radiology at the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Medicine, where I teach medical students, residents, and so on. So really interesting to see kind of the different practice models, and we'll definitely be diving into more of that during this discussion this evening. So first of all, regarding this topic, I personally felt when I asked you all to collaborate with me on this article, I felt that it was very timely and I felt that it was important. I feel that this time in a trainee's life, or whether you are a fellow trying to find your first job, or you're a young radiologist, or even maybe if you're mid-career and trying to figure out, is this what I really want? It can be a very, very challenging time. And I personally felt that there wasn't a lot of content out there that specifically was radiology focused about the various practice models so that people could be informed about what could be potentially the best fit for you. Obviously, the best fit is really going to be you will feel that when you're actually in that practice. But I think it helps to have a rubric or some sort of content to navigate through it. And I just kind of wanted your thoughts. Why did you want to collaborate on this manuscript with me?
Sure, I'll
dive in.
So I was in the process, I think at the time that we started, I was in the process of switching. And I think for me, a lot of us leave residency thinking that our first job is going to be our ultimate job. And when I was in residency, they said, no, your first job, a lot of people change after 2 or 3 years. And I was like, yeah, that's not me. I'm going to be where I am for the long haul. In particular, I had to be in the Atlanta area for my husband's job. So I knew that I wasn't going to be making big leaps and bounds geographically. And so I figured I was going to pick one practice and stay there. And so when you contacted me and I was in the process of switching from academics to private practice, it was something that I had not anticipated it. I didn't think it was going to be the right move for me. When I started my interview, I started interviewing because a former resident reached out to me. And when I started that interview process, I was just kind of testing the waters and wasn't really sure. And then ultimately decided that maybe that it would be the right move for me. And it turns out it has been at this point. But I think it was just kind of at the right time. And I thought, there's a lot of people who were coming out that were probably like me that thought, I know what I want to do. I'm going to do academics and that's going to be great. And I, probably didn't explore private practice options as much as I should have at the time when I was interviewing.
Great. I sort of feel the same way too in regards to looking back, I probably should have diversified when I interviewed as a fellow. I should have interviewed at more private practices because, the model of private practice, it's so variable in and of itself. So, what you're saying kind of speaks to me as well. Any thoughts, Darel, on that?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Essentially, we've all kind of, three of us have had the same pathway, and just in the time I've been in radiology, everything has changed so much. Academics, the rise of the academic medical center, and private practice, everything has changed tremendously. And even as a program director, over my years as a program director, advising residents and fellows as they look for jobs, that things have changed so quickly that you're right. There's just not a good source to direct people. Most trainees have to just sort of go out and talk to people, word of mouth. Maybe they know geographically where they want to be. That's always a big help. That helps narrow things down. But they just have to reach out to people they may know, or groups in areas. Some people just cold call groups and try to get a sense for where they want to be. And it's tough. The way things have changed, trainees don't realize how the gap between what we historically thought of as academic jobs and private jobs has really narrowed, and many of those sort of qualities have blurred. And so I think when it comes to what to look for in a job, it kind of goes beyond just those more superficial things we tend to think of first. And funny, we were all three kind of making the transition at the same time also. So when you reached out to us, we had all just gone through it. So that's what my interest was in being a part of this paper, was to maybe try to provide some guideposts or some early reference to help trainees as they think about this process.
Sure. And Jay, what about you?
So I always start off by saying that, first of all, to collaborate with you, Amy, is always a privilege. So that was part of the reason. But also, in all honesty, when I got the invitation, I thought about the challenges I'd gone through personally in multiple transitions in my career. And then when junior faculty have joined us and their transitions and interviewing them, and some who have gone out to different careers that I have known in the past, and all who have made transitions. I think most of us would follow the literature and say, well, transitions are hard, most are good, and we just need to have a better sense of the whole picture.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. So on that note, we'll dive right in. I have a few questions for you, and I'll direct them to one of you, and then, of course, all of you can jump in. And then if we have questions in the live chat that pertain to that topic, I'll try to dive in and so we can address those as well. So my first question is directed towards Darel, and it's regarding academics. So you spent many years purely in academics at Indiana University. What do you feel are truly the strengths of academic radiology?
When I think of academics, what really comes to mind for me is the mission. It's not more superficial things, because a lot of that's kind of blended, or it's kind of blurred the lines. But it has to do with the academic mission. And so if those are concepts that really appeal to you as a trainee, or even as a junior faculty member, then maybe that's the job to think of. And by academic mission, I guess I really mean opportunity. And the opportunities that are provided by a job in academics are mostly opportunities of protected time. That's what I mean. Because in private practice nowadays, there are plenty of opportunities. There's lots. And in radiology in general, organized radiology, there's so many more opportunities now. But in academics, the opportunities usually respected with protected time. And traditionally that was research, obviously if you go back 30 years or so. But today, most chairs are happy to let you explore whatever area you have interest in. So that could be, ethics and professionalism. That might be education, global health, health services research, whatever area that you enjoy and you want to carve out your own niche in, you can get protected time in most places. And so that is really what I think of as the best opportunity that academics provides, that is really hard to get in most jobs in private practice. Another great opportunity that is sort of embedded in that academic mission really is the university that you join has so many resources, institutional resources that you also get to take advantage of. Another core mission of the academic mission is education. So if you join an academic group, typically you're going to have educational responsibilities of teaching at the workstation, teaching lectures to all sorts of trainees. That's just a part of the job that you would need to do. Academics also got a more complex governance structure. So change sort of in general is harder to make at the department level. And it has to integrate with the dean's office and the medical center, the academic medical center. So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to the academic radiology department. So it's very different from that regard. But in general, if you value those kinds of qualities, certainly that protected time to explore your interests, then considering a career in academics should be a priority.
Yeah, very well said. And Jay, what could you contribute in terms of, you're in the throes of it. And so what strengths do you find maybe that differ from Darel, or maybe just echoing his sentiments? I think that he might be frozen there, so we may move on. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was going to say, so first of all, I do echo everything that Darel just said. I would also point out that for me, the opportunity to collaborate in academics is one of the things I really love. Obviously, working at a center like MD Anderson Cancer Center, our whole model of multidisciplinary care for patient care, it's just very robust. And the opportunity to be able to work with other disciplines collaboratively and cohesively in terms of, not just doing clinical trials and research, but even day-to-day clinical care and communication and being able to think of new ideas. It's very stimulating. And I think sometimes in the private practice world, we have so much pressures to produce clinically the high volumes that sometimes there's not always an opportunity to do that as much.
Absolutely. And Meg, do you want to add anything to Darel and Jay?
I mean, I think they said it beautifully. I mean, I think definitely if you have these really strong interests that are really interests, not just things that your attendings have told you should be doing or that you're good at, if you really truly enjoy teaching and research, then I really think that that's where academics kind of allows that. I still do a tiny bit of teaching in my private practice. I teach some family practice residents. So I kind of like scratch that itch with that, and that's enough. But yeah, if it's something that you just really enjoy doing and it truly makes you feel fulfilled, that's definitely, academics is probably something that you really need to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I want to dive in to private practice. Now, I first want to direct this towards Meg. I want to discuss the strengths of private practice, but I think we also need to take some time to talk about this new, I guess I shouldn't say newly emerging, but I do feel that it is emerging more and more, in the years of medicine, as medicine progresses, particularly as consolidation is happening, and that's the hybrid model. So first, Meg, now that you are in a private practice, I mean, what do you feel are the strengths of private practice?
Sure. So I think it's really, I just want to put this out there, like it's really hard for me to talk about private practice because that's like a huge umbrella of all these different group types, independent, hospital owned, like all of those things are kind of fall under that, and they're very different in how those groups interact. And so I think, when you're looking at private practices, you should really delve into the group culture, and that, I mean, for the academic aspect of it too, I think that's really a good way for you to understand whether or not that's going to fit. But, in terms, for me, I really wanted to feel like I was going and taking care of patients and doing as good of a job with taking care of patients as I was at an academic institution. So that was one of my concerns. So when I met all the people that I was working with, I was, hearing about, their interactions with because I do breast imaging, their interactions with our surgeons, our pathologists, and hearing that it sounded like a similar situation where there's, this collegiality and working together to take care of our patients, because that was number one. But then, to also, to be honest, I have young kids. The academic stuff that I was doing here at home felt like a lot that I just wasn't sure that I wanted to be doing it at home, right? So when you're in academics, you have to kind of earn that academic time, or depending on how the academic structure is run. And so a lot of it was coming out of my personal time. And at some point, I wanted to be able to do a really good job clinically and then get in my car and kind of decompress and feel like I was heading now home to the other half of my life. And I don't know how that's going to feel differently as my kids get older or as I progress through my career, but I really had to acknowledge that as something that I wanted to do. Now, you could argue with me that as a breast imager in an academic institution, I didn't have night and weekend call, and now I'm taking general call. I work overnights, I work weekends. But to me, it felt differently. It was a scheduled, finite time. I go in, I cover the ER from whatever time to whatever time, and then I can leave. And so I was willing to do that. It was a trade-off, and I had to kind of have that discussion with my family and think about it for how I felt about it for myself. But I think when you are talking to private practices, to hear about their call structure, are the junior people taking more call than the senior people? How is that working? Who's covering the nights? Is it internal nights? Is it out to a Nighthawk service? All of those things matter. And then when I was talking with private practices, I wanted to hear about how do you feel about ACR involvement. At that time I was still doing some ABR work, and so I wanted to know about that and how does the group feel about that. And so pre-COVID, I had agreed to give some talks at a couple of conferences, and so those ended up getting canceled, so it didn't matter. But like my group said, we'll give you those days. Those are not vacation days. Those are admin days that the group is going to give you because we value that stuff. And so I thought those were things that I needed to hear from the practice. Now, if I wanted to go to like a CME course for a week at the beach, that's not going to be covered by the group. That comes out of my own personal time. But a lot of those nuances are important to figure out with your group. And so I was really happy that my group values that. And the same for like hospital committee work. So my group pays me when I have a hospital committee meeting. And that incentivizes all of us to be really involved with our hospital and to be on those committees. And also, ensures that we're kind of building those bridges with our hospitals. So again, lots of variation in private practice in terms of how the groups are run and how those things kind of interact. But for me, this felt like the right move for me at the time to focus on clinical aspect, taking care of patients, doing some of the other kind of ACR type radiology things, but kind of letting go of that, push to research and to get promoted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you raised so many great points, and I think you've hit the nail on the head regarding just the variability of private practice. I previously, when I was in a pure academic model, I felt a lot like you did, in the sense that I just felt like I never had enough time to complete all these academic pursuits, and I was honestly getting less sleep in academics than I'm now in this private practice hybrid model. I'm actually getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, although some people probably think that's a lie, but it's true. I'm still able to keep up with all these things that I love to do, and I'm feeling much less burnt out than I previously had felt. And also, I'm a breast imager too, as you know, and I don't take any call. And, again, I'm a partner in a private practice group. So my previous academic job, I did take call. So it's just, there's so much variability. And I really, agree with you. Every practice is different. The culture, you have to see if you, could fit into that culture. And when I interviewed with my now practice, I did say there are things to me that really are non-negotiable, like my involvement in the ACR. That is very important to me. And is this something that the group will be okay with if I, have a call for a committee meeting, or if I need to go to the ACR meeting, and so these things were important. And I think a lot of times when you're younger, you're afraid to ask, right? Or you just don't remember, you don't think about asking about these things. So I guess I would say too, just to sort of piggyback off what you were saying, you really have to know what you want, and don't be afraid to ask, because you may be delightfully surprised with the response. So we have a question. How can we best carry interests from training to private practice while meeting early career expectations in private practice? Oh, great question. Who wants to start off answering that?
I would love to. So one of the really wonderful things I discovered in private practice, and my group is great at this. I'm sure that it's no exception. Is my group loves to give opportunity to any radiologist who has an interest in a certain area. And one difference in private practice is most groups need people to step up to the plate and to help in lots of areas. There's so many patient care areas and quality and clinician satisfaction and interaction areas that really, they need people to step up and help, and they need leadership in, and there's just limitless opportunities within groups for new partners to step up, to brand new recruits to voice their interests and to be their group representative in lots of different areas. Certainly, when it comes to value-added areas, that's something that they always could look for help in. And I think it's very easy for most groups to allow people to, again, carve out a little niche for themselves in their group. And one message I really want to convey is that private practice, particularly in our era of value-added healthcare and radiology 3.0, private practice groups are very much into allowing their partners, their members, to be involved in lots of organizations, particularly subspecialty societies and the ACR. And so, don't feel like if you go into private practice, you're going to be limited or you won't have an opportunity to be involved. I mean, there's so many things to do. I feel personally like I haven't been involved enough at Advent Health. I mean, there's just so many things really to get involved in. And so that's an area I think that the gap has narrowed, or the historical stereotype of private practice and academics just doesn't quite hold up nowadays, because if you are a young trainee coming out or an early career person and you're thinking about making a change from academics to private practice, you can really basically have it all. And Amy and I have talked about this, I don't know how many times. It's sort of the millennial, attitude, but it is true. I mean, there are platforms. The ACR provides so many opportunities to get involved, and most subspecialty societies as well. And we haven't even scratched the surface of social media. Amy and I co-authored a paper a couple years ago, or last year. I don't remember when it was. Pre-pandemic, we'll call it. And it talked about the fact that utilizing national organization involvement and social media, you can find a pathway in private practice and still enjoy the benefits that we once associated with a career in academics. And so it's really, again, these lines are blurred nowadays, and so I wouldn't think about it so much as this dichotomy in the traditional sense.
Yes, well said. Jay, do you want to add anything to that?
So the question is specifically about, the way I interpret the question is, when going from training to private practice, how you actually go about to leverage your interest. And I think there's a few things to keep in mind. First of all, I agree with the comments now that groups are more open-minded. Certainly when I was in private practice 10, 20 years ago, I don't think they would have been as open necessarily. Things were then much more reimbursement and volume driven than they are now. And it is true, more practices are flexing, which is good. Secondly, for the trainees' perspective, it can be a little bit daunting after you transition to try and sometimes voice your interest right off the bat. In other words, when you first join, sometimes you kind of want to blend in my opinion, a little bit. There's never a second chance to make a first impression. You want to work hard. You'll have long days, almost certainly acclimating to the practice. And you might want to learn more about the practice before voicing all these changes you want to make, so that you come across more as somebody who wants to be a team player initially. And then when you understand the culture, maybe being able to voice some of your interests. And there's no magical time. It'll depend on each practice. But in terms of a strategy that I've seen helpful for one applicant in particular, when you actually interview initially, if you have an interest in something like social media and you present it as an area of interest from the very beginning to the partners and to the recruitment committee in private practice, that this is something that you've shown interest in, you've done a project in this, and this is something you want to bring to the table, to the practice, then the partners from the very beginning know that's an expectation that they can not only look forward to, but embrace when you come on board. So that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Anything to add, Meg?
I think Darel and Jay said it all. And I think, just to echo Jay's point, I think you bring it up at the interview. I have this interest, and then you kind of gauge, like, are they like, oh, that's really interesting, we need somebody, we'd love to have that. That gives you an idea whether or not that group is the right fit for you. Then when you get started, you got to work your tail off, because you have to prove that you can do the radiology part. That's, what they hired you to do, and then kind of bring that back in as you kind of get the feel of it. So I wouldn't kind of go in gung-ho like, oh, I'm going to make all these changes and do all these great things. I would prove yourself for a little bit, but make sure that that group is interested in whatever it might be, because if they're not, it might not be the right fit for you.
Absolutely. And with that, we've talked about academics and private practice, and we've sort of touched upon it, as well as, I believe it was Darel who talked about how the lines are blurred these days. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the hybrid model. So, as we know, consolidation is happening left and right in medicine, not just in radiology, but multiple subspecialties. And so, I often have younger, trainees and early career radiologists who reach out to me and ask me kind of about the hybrid model, and how do I feel being in a hybrid model now compared to a purely academic model. And so, I guess, Darel, you're in a hybrid model. I mean, since you've gone from pure academics to a hybrid model, I mean, what has your experience been like?
I think, honestly, when I pull back and I look at the big picture, I think most residencies nowadays are hybrid model. When I look at it, even big academic centers often have a track for radiologists that are, primarily clinical, and they might work at satellite hospitals sort of in the suburbs and have limited resident input. Maybe they give a couple board reviews and that's it. And so it's possible to work in most big academic practices and have little trainee input, little day-to-day resident interaction, if that's what you want. And then there's a lot of programs that are non-university affiliated, which is where I'm at. And we have a small residency, but it's very strong. There's no fellows. They get tons of volume. And again, that's sort of the model, is the people who are very interested in teaching, they get to have residents on their service, and they teach, and the teaching is strong, the volume is strong. They get, lots of hands-on training. And it just reminds me of, in academics, how we had at Indiana, a real big group of clinical radiologists sort of out in the suburbs at our clinical hospitals who didn't do nearly as much, if any at all, noon conferences or resident teaching. So I think that if you really look at it, most groups have some form of a hybrid model, and it works because if it just depends on your interests. If you enjoy teaching, and most of us do to some degree, then you can still have interactions with residents. You can mentor. You can help on some projects, and that's very satisfying personally and professionally. It is for me because I'm not in a big academic center anymore. So I think that's a wonderful way to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I trained in a hybrid model. I think that's my first sort of exposure to the hybrid model. I trained at the University of Kansas in Wichita, and our faculty is a private practice, Wichita Radiological Group. And I believe now there are around like 35 radiologists. And that's where I really started to learn just academics affiliated with private practice, and being exposed to the inner workings of private practice and sort of the best of both worlds. I think that's, another reason why that sort of fits sort of how my interests, where I still like to do teaching, and I still do a little bit of clinical research. I'm not a hardcore researcher, but I do like the clinical stuff. I still do that, and I love to teach and keep my knowledge and skills sharp. But I do like the private practice aspect of it. And I think Darel hit the nail on the head. I am the youngest in my practice, but I oversee all of breast imaging. Sometimes there are these opportunities in private practice where you may have to sort of pay your dues or wait your turn, perhaps in a more conventional academic model. Whereas with private practice, sometimes they sort of take a leap of faith on you and kind of let you run with things. And I always enjoy a challenge in running with things. So, but I absolutely agree with Darel on that even in academics, it can very much feel like a similar model. Jay, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that the points you all bring up are very genuine. I will say that in my practice right now at Anderson, I'm actually part of a slew of radiologists who are hired for a community expansion. So my practice is predominantly community-based in the Houston area locations for Anderson, as are multiple other radiologists who've joined and been hired and recruited for that purpose. And it's nice because we get to still have the community exposure and interact with the patients and the referring providers in that atmosphere. And the reason that I think a lot of academic practices are looking at it or making expansions is multiple. One is the academic expansion reflects the mission to try and bring subspecialty care and quality of care to the community. The second part of that is just the fact that grants and reimbursements that used to be available for many academic centers are not what they used to be. And third, I think a lot of us in academics really do want to help serve the underprivileged, underserved, and not just service them in terms of helping to help disparities in access, but also the opportunity maybe to do research to improve their care longitudinally. So, I find it very fulfilling doing this kind of hybrid model, but there's many ways that we can reach the hybrid state. I think it's just a question of the lens you look at it.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'll mention, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, is historically, people say, oh, the hybrid model is kind of nice. You have, the private practice sort of benefits with the academic component, and with the benefits comes maybe a higher salary. I mean, historically, in private practice, yes, it has been known that you would make a higher salary, but I think that the lines are being blurred these days, where you can make a very competitive salary in academics and a hybrid model. Any thoughts on that, to any of you?
I think you're right. I think that's exactly what I meant, was that the volumes are up everywhere, including academics for sure. The salaries in the past 20 years certainly have risen in academics as the academic medical center model has taken over, and in private practice there's a lot more opportunities. So the two are coming closer together, and so to me, using those traditional sort of stereotypical, superficial qualities of vacation time and salary and volume, that they just aren't quite as meaningful. And they are important, don't get me wrong, but everybody has the criteria that are most meaningful. And for many, it's geography, and that's a great criteria. That's a good one to use. It narrows it down. But there are things that are more important. And I think there are great jobs in both private practice and academics, jobs that you're going to find great personal growth and professional advancement opportunities, and ability to make relationships, So at the same time, there's jobs that are not so great in both private practice and academics that contribute to burnout and that will leave you emotionally exhausted at the end of the day, right? And that you feel like you're cranking out widgets and not taking care of patients. And you feel undervalued. And that's what you want to avoid, is to feel undervalued with your work activities. Those are the definitions of burnout. And so when thinking about jobs, it doesn't, I don't think, make sense to think about these sort of classic dichotomies of academic and private practice. It makes more choice to think about the qualities that we're looking for to avoid burnout, And
Absolutely.
So think about what jobs are going to provide you with opportunity to do the things you have an interest in, like, maybe with our question, the person with the question, to sort of transition and bring their interests into the group. As they interview, try to pick up on that. Like Meg said, float some ideas and see what kind of a response you get. Or better yet, talk to people. The idea would be, hopefully, that you know some people, you have connections, and you can get some real candid conversation with some people in the group and ask them about opportunities that you can hopefully find some meaning in your work when you get there, things that you really enjoy. Also, autonomy is very important, to have some kind of control, even if it's just your little sliver of the universe of radiology. Amy, it's the breast center, that's important, to feel like you have some kind of control in your day-to-day work. And so, it's hard, it's not easy to figure that out in an interview, but hopefully if you can talk to enough people in the group and be very upfront, you can get to the bottom of that kind of question. Meg brought up a very important point, which is work-life integration, and that was important to her. And that was kind of one of the driving forces probably behind her transition. And so that's another thing you want to look for in a group, and that's probably more important than whether it's private practice or academics, is how does it allow for you to integrate family or personal time with work, and it should. It's an important part of avoiding burnout and job satisfaction.
Absolutely.
Your work should also be efficient, and it should have support mechanisms, and it should also have a reasonable workload. And we're all busier, but the workload is very important to happiness and avoiding burnout. So those are important questions, and maybe those are more important to seek the answers to and to help make your decision than, the classic things we think about when we're trying to decide or figure out if it's academics or private practice.
Yes, well said. Well, I want to switch gears, so we, in the interest of time, to another topic that I think is, this field or subspecialty practice model in radiology is becoming, I think, increasingly more apparent, even, given the pandemic. And that is teleradiology. So we touch upon in our paper about teleradiology and that practice model. And I wanted to first direct my questions to Jay. I mean, what do you think are the strengths of teleradiology? But at the same time, what do you think some of the weaknesses or potential limitations of teleradiology are?
Well, I think the reality is teleradiology is here to stay. I think the reputation that it initially garnered about a decade plus ago of being, predatory and only strictly entrepreneurial, I think that model is not really safe or fair in terms of assessing it anymore. I have colleagues who have gone and made the transition to teleradiology type practices that we've talked to, who are very happy that many of these practices now, there's opportunities very similar to other practice models to be involved in leadership, in terms of being involved in quality, in terms of being able to do research. And I think that the reality is it's very popular, right, with the new graduates, because there is often in many private practice models, a significant capital investment that is required for individuals to be able to make partner, or in terms of time, or both. And sometimes in the teleradiology model, that may be the case, but if you don't want to incur that expense or risk, it's a nice way to be able to make a relatively steady salary in a good teleradiology model. The other thing about teleradiology that I think is appealing is there is some flexibility potentially in the hours. For some individuals, they like the evenings. They'd rather have the days to themselves, especially those who have like a dual parent household, for example. You can see the potential benefit of that working out. The other issue is, you're not necessarily condemned anymore to just having to do night call or teleradiology. Several of the practices now are using a hybrid teleradiology model where you actually practice live in person and also do a little bit of the teleradiology, whatever balance you want. Now, some of the negatives potentially with teleradiology, just by inherent design, right? There is a risk of being isolation, and that low loneliness can sometimes aggravate, has been shown in multiple peer-reviewed studies, thoughts of depression, anxiety, and even potentially burnout. And so, everything in life is a balance. There's no perfect practice for anybody. I was just thinking about this because I had the question come up from a trainee recently about what to look for when you join a practice. And I think there's 5 things that, you have to sort of balance in your head. And it's lifestyle, location, income, the type of practice, and the quality of work. And then everybody needs to sit down when they make a transition on the back of a matchbook, even if you don't smoke, just something the size of a matchbook, write down 1 through 5 what your priorities are on those things. And that will really help you. And I think you should be open-minded to opportunities until you see them yourself. I think what was brought up before is really huge too. The better the network you have, there's no better leverage you have when you're a trainee coming out, or even when you're at mid-career, right? Because if you have somebody who is an older resident, for example, that you got along with well during your training, a couple of years ahead of you, and is in a practice and can speak volumes about how nice it is, that's a big draw and a comfort zone and a veil you can take with you when you go to that practice. And so, I think that teleradiology is a definitely viable option. The best data we have is it seems there's more and more physicians and radiologists transitioning into that role. And I don't see any reason, especially with informatics and some of the strengths of teleradiology, that we may not see it increase over time.
Absolutely. Darel or Meg, anything else to add?
I just wanted to touch on one thing that Jay said, which is the kind of having those other residents that were a couple of years ahead of you, or however it might be. Everybody that you work with now, everybody that you worked with in the past, it is crazy how small of a world it is. And so, when I was going to apply for my job, leaving academics, I had people there who had been residents below me or had been like trainees when I was an attending, who were then commenting on whether or not they should hire me. So it goes in all directions. You might think, I'm going to be here, I don't need to worry about, who I'm networking with or whatever, but it all matters. And so definitely as a resident, think about your co-residents as all potentially being people who could either, help you get a job or hurt you in that aspect if you kind of don't foster those relationships. And so it's really important, not that you have to be abused or anything like that, but just think about all those relationships and all those people and think about them, and it can all be, some way that you didn't expect.
Yeah. Darel?
I totally agree with that for sure. And as for teleradiology, it may be the most important lesson of the pandemic, and we can certainly do it. I think one of the main, at least bottlenecks right now is like server speed and all of the technology piece of it, but we certainly can do it. And we are just getting busier. Most groups right now are behind. Most groups have more work than they can handle, and they're trying to catch up. And everybody's hiring. They're even hiring chest radiologists. So that tells you, how much work there is to do everywhere. And I think it's a great solution. It's probably not, a great solution that everybody is working remotely, but remote radiology is a great solution for a lot of groups, private and academics, to help keep up with the work in this current work environment where it's hard to hire. I think it's just only going to be more popular, and it might even be incentivized, or a point of incentivization is hiring remote workers for established in-person groups.
Absolutely. Well, one topic that we actually didn't make the paper, and those many of you who are joining us today may not realize, we had a section in this paper initially that we ended up cutting, but I would be remiss if we didn't, briefly discuss it. So I think that many of us have realized that there are a lot of radiologists now, even if they're early in their career, who have the entrepreneurial spirit. And so we're seeing young radiologists and then radiologists of all career levels going into non-clinical careers. And so I just wanted to briefly touch on that avenue. I have colleagues who are about my career level who are maybe working part-time as a radiologist now, but then might be a CMO of an AI company. And so there's just so many innovative entrepreneurial opportunities out there currently. So I wanted to direct this first to Jay. What are your thoughts on this sort of entrepreneurial push in the non-clinical career route?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to recognize that radiology is hard to get into and hard to start into, and it's quite an accomplishment to be able to say you're a practicing radiologist. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your career has to stop there, or that you should necessarily be shy about transitioning to other careers if it's not what it turns out to be after, where you thought it was going to be after a couple of years. There are lots of options available. Physician entrepreneurial definitely is one. There are other ones too on the medical side. Some become administrative leaders, managers in hospitals, managers in insurance companies, and in the medical side, doing things that I've seen before, which you would never thought of, like becoming a professional editor or a writer for journals and things like that at your own time, at your own pace. People like to do that sort of stuff. And then there are options as well in the non-clinical space, such as, for example, being an entrepreneur. That's a big one. Whatever you decide to do, a few tips that I would suggest if you're at that stage of your career. If at all possible, I would advise bridging, because once you leave a group, and if the opportunity you thought was going to work out doesn't, it's really hard to come back and save face sometimes and join the group. Sometimes it works out because you left on good terms, but you're always more marketable in general in radiology if you have a position than if you don't, just because you have references available where you're at site right now at any given time that can vouch for your clinical credibility. And also, if at all possible, when you make the transition, if your group and you have a good relationship, when you make the bridge, maybe you'll be able to, if possible, cascade down the amount of clinical time over time. If they're flexible, you may start off, for example, working 80% clinical, then 60% or what have you. The other thing is, though, and once you make that leap, it's not final. You can always get back into radiology, but remember a few things. One is you will have lost the clinical base and relationships that you had when you left your initial practice. And secondly, some of the skills which we work so hard to keep up and learn, you don't realize it, but as time goes out, you might lose some of those radiology skills. So again, I think it's very admirable. Certainly several radiologists have done it for a variety of reasons over their careers. Some just get tired of radiology, some are burnt out, some like radiology but are just waiting for the next challenge in their career. Lots of different reasons. But unless you're really confident, really sure, think about the bridge.
Great, well said. Darel, Meg, anything to add to that? Oh, I think you're on mute, Darel.
Sorry, I don't have too much experience in this area. Really just administrators and leaders that I've known that have dialed back. And I think the equivalent of one clinical day per week is sort of a good amount of time to keep clinically active, whether it's actually one day a week or they do, like 1 week out of every 3, or however they work it out to keep their clinical skills up, because things change, so quickly. But I've known, quite a few people who've gotten so into administrative positions that they've really dialed back their clinical time. But yeah, staying clinically active is probably a good idea going forward.
Yeah. Meg?
I agree. I think you got to keep the clinical aspect, at least initially. I can give 2 slightly different perspectives. I transferred residency. So in my first residency, there was a resident who was trying to do something non-clinical. And in my second residency, there was a different person trying to do something non-clinical. So in one case, he had developed some clinical trial software. And so he spent a lot of time getting funding and finding, kind of building this business. And it was a lot of work, and he worked really hard, and he was able to get support from our residency program to allow him to do this and to take, he ended up taking a year off of residency and doing it. And so but he did it in the right way in order to get the support of the residency, to still keep that foot in, to come back when he said he was going to come back and complete his training. And so that worked out. The other one got invited to do a reality TV show, and the program director said, great, have fun, but we won't be able to invite you back afterwards. So he turned that opportunity down. But I would just say, just run it by your program director and see how they feel before you take those leaps.
Wow, that's a great story. Well, we are wrapping up, entering the close of the hour. So before we conclude things this evening, I sort of want to rapid fire go around and see what message that each of our panelists can, if there's any message that they can relay to each of you tonight, what is the message that they want to send to you? So I'm going to start with Darel. What message would you like to relay to our audience tonight?
I would say don't get caught up in the trappings of academics and private practice. Think about the things that are probably more important, and that's being close to family, being where you want to be geographically, and then finding a group with leadership that values relationships and relationship building, and that is willing to give you the opportunity to do the things that interest you, and that has a strong and stable practice model.
Wonderful. Jay. We'll come back to him. Meg.
So obviously always hard to follow Darel, but again, I echo what he says. And again, back to that group culture, that's really important. You have to figure out what the group culture is, what's going to fit best for you. And if it really then comes down to, I don't know if I should do academics or private practice, I've coached a couple of people through this recently, and we came up with this question that you can ask yourself, and Darel's going to tear this apart because the hybrid model doesn't work here. But if you have to work a Saturday, because we're all going to work a Saturday, what would you rather be doing? Would you rather be on call, churning out studies, or would you rather be doing research? And that, when I say research, like digging into the nitty gritty of like manuscript revisions and making those graphs and doing all your formatting, your references, all of that. So if you have a Saturday, which of those would you rather want to do? Maybe that's where it could help lead you on initially.
That's great. I love it.
Good.
But what about the third option, where you don't want to work this Saturday, but you kind of like to do the revisions, but then you want to go shopping and throw that. That's kind of like a day of my life on a Saturday. I do a little bit of work, but then I like to go, shop or go on the boat with my husband or something like that. So
yeah, that's option 3, the Amy model.
Yeah. So. Well, I'm just so elated that you both were able to join me, as well as Jay. Fantastic discussion this evening. please, those who are watching this evening, don't let the discussion stop here. We're on social media. Darel, what is your Twitter handle again, if you could share that with our audience?
My handle is my name, at Darel Heitkamp.
And Meg, if you could share yours, please.
Sure, it's at M Fleming MD.
Great. And mine's at Amy K Patel. Let's not let the discussion stop. We're here to help you as well. So, and on that note, thanks for joining us tonight. Again, I'm Amy Patel. I'm the Associate Editor of Digital Media for the Journal of the American College of Radiology, signing off, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.